Hi, and welcome to show number 16 of the El Cafecito Travel Talks, a podcast where people share travel stories and adventures. My name is Tony Lloyd, and I'm your host. First of all, I'd like to thank all the people who have been listening in so far. And for the new people, I'd like to welcome you and encourage you to subscribe. Please take a look at our Facebook page for the written stories, and if you're someone who likes to write, we're still looking for some written stories. If you'd like to help support our show, please take a look at our podcast notes to see how you could donate. For today's show, I talk with a travel journalist for one of the most popular radio stations in Austria about how he started his career, some of the adventures that he's been on, and how COVID has changed the direction of his career. So please get yourself a cup of tea or a coffee and enjoy the show.
My name is Johnny Bliss. I am a travel journalist. I'm originally from Canada, but I live and work in Austria. But I was hardly in Austria for well over a decade because I've had a travel column called Johnny's Journeys, which has enabled me to travel around the world professionally.
So we met, I guess it's about 3 years now, here in Cuenca, Ecuador, where you were staying here, and then we also did an interview together where you interviewed me. And just to let you know, you were like one of my inspiration for starting this podcast. After we air this interview, I will post the interview that we did originally together, so the audience could hear that.
Excellent.
Tell us a little bit about your background before you started traveling.
Okay, well, I left Canada when I was 13 years old. My parents broke up when I was a little kid, which led to me being sort of used to being a little bit ungrounded, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
I think it's easier to become a traveler, or there's more of a compulsion to become a traveler if your roots were not necessarily strong in a given place as a child. But anyways, when I was 13, my father moved me much against the desires of my mother and somewhat against my desires to California, where I lived in San Francisco. You know, it was complicated for me. He asked me, "Oh well, did you want to go?" And I thought maybe I do, but yeah, also I had no idea what another place and so far away would be like. I think in the end it was a really good thing that I went there. It really broadened my perspective because I grew up in a small community near Vancouver, which was kind of limited in a way. It was a rural community. And then I was in San Francisco, and it was completely different demographics, a completely different lived experience of people, and it
Mhm.
was sort of, I mean, it really freaked me out at the time, but I think it was an excellent start to a traveler's life because here I was middle teenage years, and I had left behind kind of what I knew, and I was in this new world. Then I stayed in San Francisco, Oakland, Bay Area for about 10 years. I tried to start a record label, and that didn't. I guess it kind of succeeded, but on life support. I didn't like it died the second I stopped working on it, but I was able to pay my rent with it. So there's that. It was like a mixed thing, but I just wanted to get away from from America because I felt like even when I was making lots of money, I wasn't happy and I didn't really achieve what I set out to do, and it was always just like this massive struggle, and I just felt like, what is the meaning of any of this? So then I saved up some money, booked a one-way flight to Europe, and moved to Europe where I wasn't legally allowed to live. But that was a technicality that I worked my way through.
And how did you choose Vienna?
Vienna chose me. So one of my failed business that I tried to start was based around trip hop music. I really liked trip hop music, Portishead, Massive Attack, and I found out that there were lots of really cool trip hop bands around the world. So, and this sounds really dated today. I
Okay.
wanted to start a business called triphopsource.com. Which now just, I mean, that's just ridiculous. That's such a early 2000s idea. But
Okay.
anyway, I made contact with an Austrian trip hop band, or a singer from an Austrian trip hop band. I bought their entire discography. They were fantastic. And then
You
we
gonna
kind
tell
of,
us the name?
yeah, Sin. They're not on Spotify, but you can find them on YouTube. If you look up Sin, Mona Moore, that's the friend who introduced, who I got in touch with, and
Okay.
who I eventually came to visit. Nothing happened to the business. It was just
Okay.
an idea that went nowhere. But I struck up a friendship, and then when I was in the UK a couple years later, I realized that I needed to get out of the UK. It was super expensive. I didn't like the food. To the Brits, I say I like London a lot more now. But the
Mhm.
issue then was I had friends and I couldn't reach them, and and the pound was particularly strong against the dollar. So I just saw my money just disappearing, and I needed somewhere that felt a little bit more relaxed. London is not a relaxed place. I think no one will say that it is. But anyway, so I asked Mona, hey, can I come visit you in Vienna? I just need a place that's a little less crazy than London to kind of get my head straight, and she said, yes, well, come visit me. Sort of the rest is history, because I like, she introduced me to all these intellectuals and creative musicians, writers, and all these people that she just happened to know. And because I couldn't just stay with Mona forever and ever, but I liked being in Vienna, it had really charmed me. It had this old Europe magic to it. I started couch surfing, and I made a lot of lifelong friends that way, actually. I mean, this was back in 2006. It's 2020. I'm in touch with almost all of them.
You got to Vienna, you met all these really interesting people.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with FM4 or FM Fair, as they say in German? It was interesting because I had never heard of this radio program or this radio station before until you did the interview with me. And then a few months later, after the interview came out, I had met somebody from Vienna that was here in the hostel. And I said to them, oh, have you ever heard of this radio program? And I thought it was just like a little radio program. And they said, oh, yeah, that's the most popular radio program in Vienna. It's like they're most like, oh, that's really interesting. Okay. So how
Yeah.
did you get involved with them?
Well, the funny thing is, what I didn't know about Mona was not only was she a great singer in an amazing trip hop band, she also was a radio personality for FM4. And so she saw me hanging out in Vienna, and being sort of reticent to go back to the UK, which is where I'd planned to be. And I just kept making more and more friends, and had a music project, and it just seemed like a place for me to stay. And she said that she woke up one morning and she was just like, "That's it, Johnny should work in the radio." And so she got a hold of head of production and said, "Hey, I know this Canadian guy who's a creative and he's really good and blah blah blah." So she typed this, and then I receive an email from him, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to come and record a pilot?" So they were like, "Okay, let's work on giving you a night program," and that was how it all began.
What was it about, the night program? Was it about travel right away, or did you
No,
transition into travel?
no, it had nothing to do with travel. No, it was just about music and bands and artists who had new albums and new releases and concerts and stuff like this. It's just, a music show. And I still have it to this day. Let's go to concerts. I would talk to people who went to the concerts. Hey, how did you like this show? They would answer me in German, which was also a story because my German wasn't that good at that point. How
Okay.
my German got to a certain level was through listening to all these Austrians telling me what they thought about this show, and I would have to listen to it over and over and over again until I really understood what they were saying, so that I knew I could broadcast it. So, which was it was really a freaky experience. They have a native language policy, so they want me to always talk in English, but if I'm talking to an Austrian, they want the Austrian to always talk in German. Like it can be a bit of a weird listening experience, because you're like, okay, he was in English, now we're listening to German, now we're in English, now we're in German. And then it was coming to summertime, and I was eligible for a cheap travel card that would enable me to travel across Austria for free on the train all summer long. And there were all these music festivals, so the natural kind of progression from doing all these like reviews of concerts in Vienna was to do a bunch of festivals and go to places and just talk to people in Upper Austria and wherever. So for the summer, we came up with this column called Johnny's Journeys. So I was just traveling around Austria talking to people at this stuff. And then there was the Venice Biennale. So I said to the radio, hey, what if I take Johnny's Journeys to Venice? And they said, yeah, sure. So then I went to Venice, and there was this festival in Iceland called Iceland Airwaves, which a friend of mine had told me, oh, it's the best music festival, blah, blah. And as it was coming to my birthday, I said to myself, well, I'm just going to try to get press accreditation. I'm going to go there. And if FM4 doesn't want features from this festival in Reykjavik, then okay, I just have a nice birthday trip. But if they do want this, then I can really start thinking about like, taking this further. So I went to Iceland, which has turned out since then to be one of my favorite countries. I'm there right now, actually. I interviewed all these people, and I had this amazing time. Saw all these bands. Did everything I would normally do in Austria, but in the Icelandic context. Basically, it was this massive success. So I came back, and I was like, I could keep doing this. And then there was the Vancouver Winter Olympics early the next year. So I came to the chief editor and I said, hey, this is my old stomping ground. I grew up here. I know all these venues. That was an exaggeration.
Because you were 13.
Yeah, but I was just like, hey, I'm the perfect person. And so they gave me the money for the flight. I got the accreditation, and I went there, and and I was just interviewing all kinds of people at the Olympics, and this felt like a real success.
Expanded a lot further from the first days of doing just around Austria, some of the other countries that you've gone to and done reports.
Yeah, well, in the context of traveling, let's see. I spent a lot of time in Indonesia. I was in Burma, Myanmar, where I interviewed a monk anonymously when it was still under this kind of very tight military control. I went to South Africa for the World Cup there. I went to Russia years later for the World Cup there. I have been to Iceland every year since 2009. Let's see, I've traveled all over Canada so I've seen a lot more Canada than most Canadians. I've traveled, of course, all over Austria and continental Europe. I did something in Israel. I did something in Dubai, India, Bangladesh. Bangladesh was a special one. Svalbard, Longyearbyen, Spitsbergen in the North Pole, New Zealand, Australia. I've done a lot of features in Australia, and yeah, Ecuador. I was in the Galapagos Islands for my column as well, and China.
What would you consider your style to be of your program? What would you say is
Storytelling.
your storytelling?
What I do is I find the most interesting people who I can around the world. Sometimes I travel great distance to meet them. For example, our mutual friend Tony Giles. I
Okay.
went to London specifically to see him one year because I'd
Okay.
heard about his adventures as a blind backpacker, and I knew I wanted to hear his stories. I wanted to broadcast them. So I've often made trips basically for the stories and to meet the people, whether it's a former garment worker at textile factories in Bangladesh who's become an activist, or it's a person in Toronto who's running a curiosity cabinet called the Skull Store, which sells skulls and amazing artifacts from all over the world in a conservation oriented way. Or when I went from India almost directly to Reykjavik so I could interview the comedian mayor of Reykjavik at that time, Jan Gunnar, who was a great example of an anti-politician who made a positive difference in the world.
You just led right into my question, where I was going to ask you, what would you consider your top three most interesting interviews?
The thing is, I feel sad if I answer that because I'm probably forgetting some of the most interesting ones. So why don't I say instead, here are just like three come to mind. I mean, I've already told you a few of them, to be
You
honest.
did. You did. That's why I said that you led into my question.
I mean, I may have even already said three names. Let's see. There's our buddy Tony.
Yes.
There's you. You were amazing.
Well, thank you.
There's Jan Gunnar, who's amazing as well. I've met so many interesting Icelanders, authors, who are also involved in environmental activism. Andre Magnusson, who was almost the president of Iceland at one point. Ben Lovett from the Skull Store was absolutely fantastic. But if I want to say some new names that I haven't said already, Robert J. Sawyer is a science fiction writer who had a lot of amazing things to say. There were people I met who I didn't properly interview, but I had conversations with who were absolutely fascinating as well. I've met people like Stephen Hawking, who I
Okay.
didn't interview because it's difficult. It was difficult for him to talk,
Okay.
but nevertheless, being in the presence of this person was an honor. Sometimes it wasn't just about the person though. Sometimes it was like finding the right people to speak to a story. So I did a series about Borneo, like the what's going on in Borneo. There was a bit of an adventure journalism, adventure tourism aspect to it, but there was also sort of, well, logging is having this effect on the orangutans and on these other local wildlife and what could happen. West Papua was interesting. That's colonized by Indonesian, and
Okay.
the indigenous people there really don't like that, and so there has been a lot of armed struggle there, and also there's a lot of censorship. And one of the things I learned there, because sometimes you just kind of go out on on these journeys and you don't realize what you're getting yourself into, right? You're not If you try to do journalism in West Papua, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble because you're not they don't allow journalists in, and they don't, if a West Papuan activist speaks to you as about the political situation, they can get arrested, disappeared, and all kinds of terrible things can happen. So before going on that trip, I didn't realize just how serious the situation was there. And so I was messaging some people who knew some people over there, and I was like, "Hey, do you know somebody I could talk to?" And blah blah, and over Facebook. And what I didn't realize is that both the Australian and the Indonesian intelligence services monitor
Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. So by the time I arrived, there was, I guess, a file on me, and I remember like I was being followed by people, and people would pretend to just be other tourists, but they would do it in really suspicious ways, and they would come and say, "Oh, so tell me about yourself. What are you doing?" I remember I got on a domestic flight to go from one part of West Papua to another, and a guy sat down next to me, and he had a tablet or something open, and he was immediately taking pictures, and he was just like, "Hey, I'm from Malaysia. Where are you from?" Click, 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 click. What do you do for a living? I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't kind of scary, right?
Okay,
I
exactly.
and I think they probably also didn't mind that I knew that they were doing this. It was to scare me off of doing that kind of journalism. So I even had a moment where I was like, okay, you know what? I wasn't prepared for this. I'm just not going to do any journalism while I'm here. But then people kept wanting to talk to me. I made contact with somebody who, and I'm not going to go into too much detail
Okay.
because for obvious reasons. But a person got me in touch with some freedom fighters who I ended up interviewing in a hut in the middle of the jungle, about all of this stuff. And I remember sitting there with these these freedom fighters and thinking, this started with me interviewing bands and drunk people at gigs in Vienna, and look at where I am now. This is
Wow.
insane. So these were like really interesting interviews that maybe I can't name anyone, but just the fact that the cultural context of being there, the
Mhm.
being in the world, people gave me this view into the world that they inhabit. And then I've always loved is the fact that I talked to this person, whether it's a person in this remote tribe in West Papua, or a monk who is protesting the government in Burma, or like this Bangladeshi labor activist, Kalpana actor. She was amazing. And then I cut their stories down to radio size, and I send them to Austria by email, and people hear these voices that they never would have heard otherwise. And
That's
and that was
interesting.
what I really loved about the job. What I still love about the job, although being the middleman between this world and this totally different world.
Was there a time where you're like, okay, maybe I should just forget about traveling all over the world and doing this. I should just go back to Vancouver and live like a calm life.
Well, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I mean, I was actually thinking about stopping my travel column for a while. If all you've known for a decade is the travel life, that means you don't have a bed that is your bed. That means you start a love affair with this amazing person that you meet, and then 2 days later you're thousands of kilometers from that person, and it fizzles out.
Mhm.
It means that you have to find a new place to do your laundry all the time. It means that cooking, uh, you miss out on all of the cultural phenomena. People are talking about TV shows that you don't have time to watch. You miss out. You don't ever live anywhere. And this is both the dream, but it can also be a nightmare. And that's particularly with the kind of journalism I was doing. As you can imagine, there was a lot of anxiety and stress, and things could go wrong. I had the dengue fever in Timor,
Okay.
near the end of my Indonesia tourist visa, and so I had to keep moving, although I was very sick. But also because I had all these flights booked, and there was a hurricane coming from Australia, and I didn't want to get caught in that, and then end up in a hospital in Timor. So there's you go through all these things, or I could tell you so many traumatic stories. The time my snorkeling boat in Indonesia left without me, and I was just like, oh shit, I'm here in the middle of the ocean, and there's no boat.
You're
And
snorkeling and the boat went away.
yeah, and so and I don't swim very often, so after swimming it for a while, my arms would spasm, my legs would spasm, and I would just be very uncomfortable. Also, I'd bruised my ribs earlier by jumping onto the boat in the wrong way, so I was just like swimming in this situation. Funny enough, I wasn't stressed out then. I had this very weird disconnect to what was going on around me. Like I would be like, okay, well, this is probably bad, but like in this very calm way. But then I would like see a turtle swimming underneath me, and I'd be like, "Oh, it's a turtle." Or then I'd see some plastic floating in the water, and I'd be like, "Ah, humans,
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of the ocean floating here, and there's some plastic. This is awful." And then even when I was thinking, okay, well, there's this distant island over there. I guess I'm gonna start swimming over there, and so I'm swimming toward this distant island. I had no idea if I would make it there. And the end of the story is anticlimactic. Eventually, the boat did come back. At some point, they recognized that I was missing. But I think I was in the water with no idea what was going on for at least an hour. In West Papua, there was some sort of riot that broke out in front of my guest house, glass breaking, people fighting violently, and I remember just being like, "Oh shit, this is happening right in front of my room. What if they break into my room? What's going
Mhm.
on?" Right? And I tried to hide under the bed, but the bed was too close to the floor, so finally I just had to give up and just lie there. The fact that I was being followed the entire time I was there, and I had this strong feeling of responsibility, like I didn't want to accidentally cause somebody else to get disappeared and tortured and murdered. Nor did I want to get trapped there and arrested. I mean, there was a French film crew who had tried the same thing, and they were less cautious or less lucky, and they were imprisoned in somewhere in Papua for like 6 months, I believe.
Wow.
So it's
Okay.
and this is a heavy malaria area. I carried so much anxiety, so much PTSD from so many of the most dangerous things I tried.
Mhm.
I'm glad that I did those things, but at a certain point, continuing to travel was almost like it was a weird compulsion. I did it because it's what I knew how to do. I did it because I liked it, but I also was. I think also sometimes you keep doing something because you think it's all you know how to do at a certain point. There was definitely a point where I needed to stop.
So now that you're thinking of settling down, what does settling down look like to you?
I'm going to tell you the story of what happened with COVID because I think it's really, in a way, I'm a bit embarrassed by the story because so many people have lost so much in this time, and I'm ashamed to say it, but COVID came at precisely the right moment for me. So I had planned. I was saving up paid vacation days, and I had the intention to stop my travel column roughly on April 1st. My
Okay.
plan was April 1st is when I'm going to stop so I can work on a book or more than one book
Okay.
and turn my focus to writing because now I have a lot of stories that I want to tell. But so I was just like, okay, I'm going to use up all of my material, and this is the window for like 9-10 months. I had April 1st, 2020 on my calendar, and that was when I was going to stop this. So lo and behold, March 13th, all of Austria shuts down, and my travel call. Luckily I've used up almost all of my material by that point. I have hardly anything left. That's good because almost everything I would have had would have been expired because everything everybody's talking about now is so totally different than what they were talking about before. So all of the material, however timeless it might seem, would no longer make sense in a post-COVID world. But then I discovered, we're doing this right now, I discovered that I could do more interesting work in the context of COVID, talking to people all over the world because of the fact that I know so many people everywhere now, that I could talk to you about what's happening this week. We broadcast 3 days later. It's still very current. It's not one of these timeless stories that I would do while I was doing my travel column. It's very present. And so you hear a voice from Ecuador about what's happening in Ecuador right now. Now you hear a voice from Melbourne about what's happening for artists and wedding celebrants in Melbourne. Now you
Okay.
hear where the blind backpacker is when he can't backpack, and so he's in self isolation in England, and what's that
Mhm.
like?
Okay.
So I was actually the funny thing is I was burnt out. I was burnt out on having to travel to get to collect these stories. I was burnt out on not having a home. I was burnt out on the stress and having to think about 20 things at once all the time. The fact that we can use these virtual platforms to communicate and to share our stories and that it works out as well as it does and it sounds as high quality as it does, this is a godsend. It's given a sort of second life to my career. I no longer feel like stopping because I don't have to necessarily be physically in a place to tell a good story. COVID showed me that I was able to collect amazing stories without spending all the money and going to all the work and exhausting myself and burning myself out and exposing myself to whatever diseases and all this stuff, and that sort of rejuvenated me because I do love this is what I love, this conversation, this sharing. uh
Exactly.
it's hard to burn out on that.
Where would you see yourself? Where would you see yourself physically if you're not moving about?
Well, at the moment, I mean, Vienna has become very homely, so certainly for the time being, let's say, I'm quite content doing everything I'm doing in Vienna. So of course there is also the thought about, well, I'm from the west coast of Canada. It could be nice to spend some more time over there.
Now that we're coming towards the end, my final question is, what would be something that you've learned through all these experiences that you could share with the audience?
I think the best part about all of this, absolutely the best part, is all the connections I've forged with people. So I'm staying with somebody I consider who's like a mother to me. I call her my Icelandic mom. I
Okay.
visit her every year, So I'm so far away from my blood family, but at least I'm able to see my Icelandic family, right?
Okay.
I just feel so grateful that I've encountered so many inspiring, adventurous, storytelling people who live in their own way, and I think it's been really good for me as well because I've surrounded myself with so many people who all dance to the rhythm of their own drum that for me doing things your own way is normal, right?
Okay.
I am surrounded by I have been inspired by so many people who are absolute heroes. And I think that's what you encounter when you're traveling. You meet so many heroes, you
Exactly.
know.
Our time's come to an end. So it was nice talking with you and catching
Okay.
up. And I'm sure we could actually do this again another time and maybe go into one particular story. But for now,
Thank
enjoy
you.
the rest of your time in Iceland. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. Johnny's contact information will be in our podcast notes. As mentioned in the show, next week's episode will be the interview that I did with Johnny a few years back here in the Cafecito in Cuenca, Ecuador. Please don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you're someone who likes to write, we're still looking for some more written stories. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, please take a look at the podcast notes to get the information on how to do so. Special thanks go out to Marshall, our editor. Looking forward in the future to having the opportunity for us to meet up. But for now, all the best and please take care.